Welcome to Managing your Red Team Operations with Ghostwriter. I'm Christopher Maddalena. I'm the Director of Internal and Community Products at SpectreOps. I'm also the creator and principal developer of Ghostwriter. You can find me at @cmaddalena on Twitter as well as other places, and I'm Chris Maddalena on GitHub. Before we dive into the actual tool and start talking a bit about Ghostwriter, I want to talk a little bit about what the problem is, or the set of problems are that Ghostwriter seeks to solve. When you're working on a red team or a penetration test or really just about any offensive engagement, you have a lot of different information sources. You have statements of work, rules of engagement. You might have different chat channels, all kinds of different places where you might need to find information. It's a lot easier if we can condense all of that into one place and create what I like to think of as a knowledge base rather than a filing cabinet. This also extends to our infrastructure. Our projects depend on it, but as many teams will tell you, they have maybe dozens or perhaps even hundreds of domain names they have. They have servers set up in the cloud that get stood up and brought down frequently, trying to keep track of all those IP addresses, the host names, who's using what domain, how that domain has been used in the past. It can be really, really difficult. And that's a big problem because the effects outlast that individual project. If I use a certain domain name and end up getting it burned, just say it gets flagged as malicious by a virus total or some other scanner out there, and then it goes kind of back into the pen. Someone else comes along and sees that same domain name and thinks, hey, that looks pretty good for my assessment. I'll use that, but they have no idea that I've used it already and the categorization has changed to malicious or phishing. That's a problem. We need a really consistent way to manage all this infrastructure and keep track of our domain names and know who's using them and how those domains have been used. And there's activity logging. Tracking your activities is extremely important. You need to be able to answer questions, help out with deconflictions, be able to tell a client what you were doing and when. But it can be really difficult to figure out what to log and when to log it and switch over into that mode of logging your activity from actually trying to solve that technical problem. And then, of course, we have building reports. Doing that consistently is something that a lot of teams struggle with. There's questions of how to maintain templates. How do those templates get created? Where do you store them? What happens if they need to be changed or updated? What about findings? A lot of places will have a finding library that is effectively like an Excel spreadsheet or something to that effect, where it's very difficult to update them and keep consistent formatting and make it really easy to take them from wherever they're stored and get them into your final report. And the same goes for maintaining a style guide and all of that. It's really key to get all this figured out so that you can actually have consistent reports so that if a client comes back to you a year later because they liked your report from the year prior, they're going to get the same thing again or something better, not something entirely different. So now let's talk about how Ghostwriter can help you with this. And then we'll dive into a demo and I'll actually show you how Ghostwriter works with managing a project. The way I like to think of Ghostwriter is that it's an additional member of your team. It's your scribe, it's someone who can just sit there and be wholly dedicated to managing your project metadata. It knows who's working on the project. It knows what's in your project. All the information is collected in one place. It's linked together and easily viewed in one location. And the key thing there is that it's also consistent. It's consistent organization of all that information so that you always know where to find this data. If you've never seen Ghostwriter before, just a quick look at the tech stack so you know what's going on behind the scenes. Ghostwriter is a Django application, which means that everything behind the scenes is Python 3.10, and everything has been Dockerized. So we have multiple Docker containers. We have a PostgreSQL Docker container for the backend database, a Redis container for the automated message queuing and processing. So there's background tasking, the ability to schedule tasks or run them in the background. We use Nginx for the web server. And then the brand new feature we just added into our version 2.3 release candidate is a Hasura GraphQL engine for a very powerful GraphQL API that we'll take a look at here at the end of the demo. Welcome to the Ghostwriter dashboard. This is where you'll start after you log in, and it's also where you can see your current assignments, reporting tasks, as well as your work calendar. And this is where we'll start with the demo, because we can see here that starting next week, we have an assignment. So let's take a look at this project and make sure we're ready to go to hit the ground running on Monday morning. So we go to our project and take a look at it. You can see it's for the fictional company Cabletown from the show 30 Rock. We're going to be doing a penetration test from April 18th through May 20th, 2022. We are currently the only ones assigned. And if we look at the project calendar, switch to the month view to make it a little bit easier to see a few things. We can see that we have the execution dates tracked, who's working on which days, as well as the due dates for objectives and their associated subtasks, which we'll take a look at in a moment. Looking at the next tab over, we have our scope lists, which are broken up in this case into 3 separate lists. One, so it can be marked as a disallow list, or, don't touch me list. We have one that's just a standard scope list. And then one down here that's marked with a little yield symbol, just to indicate that we should handle those with care. Now, if we need to export any of these for use with a tool like Nmap, say, we can easily export them as a text file. To use with Nmap or anything else, it might take a text file as an input. On the next tab over, we have objectives. Here we can keep track of either just like sort of to-do list items, things that need to be done for the assessment, or we can use it as proper objectives with sub-objectives and the like. Really, how you use it is up to you. It's totally customizable in that way. You can just use it as a to-do list or track it as your official objectives for the assessment. So here we have our objective. You can see that the progress is currently 0%. We have our subtasks. The due dates are all color-coded, so you can easily see just by looking at them if yellow, meaning that it's coming up here pretty soon, being that this one would be next Monday from the current date. And this one would be down a little bit down the road, so it's still green. Now, if we mark that one as done, it gets crossed out, marked as done, and we can see the progress update in real time. Much like if we were to add a new subtask, you can see it goes back down to 33%. Over here on the Targets tab, we can track interesting hosts that we might want to be able to take a look at once we have access to them. We can leave notes as to why we're interested in looking at those hosts. We can also mark the hosts as owned or compromised, much like you can do in Bloodhound, to keep track of which ones we've successfully accessed. The next tab over is really interesting. It's the Logs tab. Activity logging is really important, and if you're not doing it, you definitely should be. But it can be really difficult to do, because you don't really know what to log and when, and that context switching that comes from your doing something technical and stopping what you're doing to log what you did with the proper timestamps can be really tedious and difficult. And that's why we've created a couple of utilities that are under the Ghost Manager repo alongside Ghostwriter on GitHub, Mythic Sync and Cobalt Sync, which will automatically send log data from Mythic C2 and Cobalt Strike, respectively, to Ghostwriter. You can also use it as a model for terminal logging or logging from other tools, or have those tools output logs to a CSV file you can import into Ghostwriter. Either way, any data that you put into the log is synced across all the clients that are currently viewing the log. We use WebSockets for that. Up here, we can see that connected here in the corner, meaning our WebSockets are functional. So if I kick off the example script you can find in the repo that will push, in this case, I'm going to have it send 10 test randomly generated events over here, about one every 2.5 seconds. We'll see them slowly begin to come in as I talk. So as each one fires, Ghostwriter updates and show us the data as we go. This would also work if we were making edits and someone else was viewing us. They would see our edits in real time. It's not quite like a Google document where you can see someone actually typing out their edits, but it's very similar in that if someone were to delete an event or add an event, make an edit, everyone else currently viewing that log would see it in real time. So if you're managing multiple C2, have lots of different agents, multiple people working on a project. This is a really great view to have open in a tab so you can actually see the events coming in from all the different sources as you go. Let's hop back to our project and now take a look at infrastructure. So we can see here we have some servers set up already, but we don't have any domains. So let's go check out what it looks like when we look at our domains. So if we search for spectrops.io, we see that pops up and we can see the status is available. So it's available for us to check out. Now, when you check out a domain, that basically just flags it as unavailable. And you're letting your team know, hey, for the next 4 weeks, I'm going to be using this domain and I'm going to be using it for C2 or phishing or whatever you check it out for. And that also creates a log for the project history for that domain. So let's come in here and take a look at that. If we look at project history, we can see it's been used once before, and it was used for that Cabletown assessment last year, which actually plays into some of the checks that Ghostwriter will do when you try to check out a domain. So if we try to check out, and then we select Cabletown, we'll get a warning that says, hey, in the past, this domain has already been used with that client. So if we were worried about making sure we were creating unique infrastructure, that would be a good hint for us to go find a different domain. Now, there's also a health tab. This is kind of unique to Ghostwriter in that Ghostwriter will try to judge the health of your domain. And this is based primarily on virus total data. So if you have virus total API keys, you can provide them to Ghostwriter and use virus total to check in on your domains. So this domain is marked as healthy because we have recently run the domain check. We have good categories down here. The virus total scanner didn't have any results for spectrops.io, no malicious payloads or anything like that. I would certainly hope not. So this is a good domain. It's nice and healthy. But let's take a look at a domain that is definitely not healthy. Here we have this domain here. It's marked as burned already, we can see. We come over here and we can see that, yeah, spyware, malware, phishing, and other fraud, botnet. And that's because when we run this check for Virus Total is very aware this is a bad domain because it's been linked to the Conti ransomware group. So this is definitely a bad domain. And judging by the fact that the Virus Total scanner has found malicious content at that domain and all this categorization, this is definitely a burned domain and not one we would want to use. Going back to our projects, let's now take a look at the Documents tab and talk about reporting. So here you can see all of the findings for all the reports associated with this project. Here we just have the one report and the one finding so far. We take a look at that report. We can see that we have just one critical finding being tracked so far and nothing else here. Let's add a few more findings. One, we could add a blank finding, and that'll create a totally blank finding that we could then customize and use to create a brand new finding template. If we wrote something unique that we'd want to save for later and potentially use with other reports, we can easily come over here and say clone to library to make that a new template in our finding library. Let's go have a look at that right now and add a few more findings. Go to the finding library. We can see our finding templates we have in the library so far, and we can just easily add those to our reports like so. And now when we make a copy of these to the report, they are just copies. So if we make an edit, they won't be reflected here. They're only for our report. So we're free to edit to our heart's content, add evidence files, customize it as needed for the project or the client or that individual finding. It won't affect our master templates, and we're good to go. So if we jump back to our report, we can now see we have these available to us. We can click and drag to reorder things or change their severity. We also have these little paper clips where we can use to attach evidence files. So this one already has an evidence file attached. We can view it. In this case, it's an image file. Text files are also acceptable. In this case, we chose an image, and it's just the 30 Rock poster. We have a caption that this is a 30 Rock poster. All right, everything looks good. But what we can do with that now that it's been attached is if we come in here to edit the finding, you'll see we have access to WYSIWYG editors for all the different fields. Any formatting we do in these editors will be carried over into our final Word document. So we can do things like make things italics or bold, or even change font color, make inline code, or code blocks, lists, block quotes. Anything you might normally do in Word for a report, you can do here, and it'll actually be reflected in your final Word document. But you can also do a couple of special things. Like in this case, we want to reference our evidence file, which we named 30rock. And so we just put it inside some curly braces with a period, and that tells Ghostwriter to look for evidence named 30rock and insert it here. If it's a piece of text evidence, it'll insert it as a sort of like a code block with that text evidence inside of it. Or if it's an image, it'll insert it as an image into your Word document, along with the caption you've provided. In addition to that, if you like using cross-references in your reports, you can easily create a cross-reference with the ref keyword and give it the name of your evidence, and it will create a cross-reference to the caption of that inserted evidence file. So in this case, we'll end up with a reference pointing at this figure once it's actually made into a figure inside the Word document. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So if we go down here to the bottom, we can generate our various reports. Word and PowerPoint are some of the biggest ones and most popular, but we also have Excel and pure JSON. Many people like to use the pure JSON to then take this and import it into another tool or do some additional enrichment of the data via the JSON and then output something like a LaTeX document or something like that. But if you want to do Word, you can easily use a document template. So here we have a couple to choose from. We have the Cabletown template selected. And if we come over to our template library, we can take a look at what this actually is. So we open that up. We can see a couple things. This is a protected template. So I'm an admin, so I'm allowed to edit it. But you can protect templates to make it so that only admins can edit or delete them. By opening up the template we have saved here, there's a lot of these double curly braces and curly percent sign. That's because we're using the Jinja 2 templating language. It's actually fairly easy to use, but can look a bit complicated. The Ghostwriter Wiki has a large write-up on how to get started with all this, how to use all these values, as well as some of the built-in and custom Ghostwriter filters and other expressions available to you for Ghostwriter and building Word documents. But really the key thing to take away from this for the demo is that you can very easily reference any piece of your project data, whether it be like the project end date, a client name, your objectives, all within the template because all of it is passed to the template when it's being rendered. So you are free to reference things like your client contacts and do things like Jinja 2 for loops for tables like this one, say like for each contact in client.contacts, create a row that is their name, job title, and email address, and so on. What's really cool are some of the filters and other things available to you through Ghostwriter, like filter severity. So we can create up here a table that's all of our findings. And then next to that, we can create a table that's just the findings that are critical and high. Or down here, a table that is just findings of the network and web type. Do other things like that. It's very easy to modify the data, format it differently, filter it. Makes these templates very, very powerful. And down here, for example, we have our findings. And this is where we're going to take a look at comparing the generated document with this one right here so we can see how our evidence shows up and all of that. So let's hop back to our report and do that right now. So I'll come down here, click Generate. We get our report, pop that open, and here they are side by side. You can see all of the placeholders, those statements and expressions used for Jinja 2 have all been replaced, for example, like with the contact names, IP addresses, and other project data. So now if we scroll down, we can look at our finding, and here's what the template looks like next to the final product. So in this case, we didn't really have too much for it to do. We had a very simple finding with just some text, but our text is completely formatted as it was in the WYSIWYG. Our italics are italicized, our bold is bold, and so on. And we also have our image evidence inserted here with a proper caption, and it's a proper Word document figure. Also, our cross-reference is here, and it does work and brings us down to our figure. The only thing you might wonder about is why it isn't a number, and that's just because with Word, for the first time after opening it up, you'll just have to tell it to update the fields, and there now we have figure 1. So all of our findings have been properly formatted as they would have been in the WYSIWYG back in Ghostwriter. One takeaway from this is that the formatting in the WYSIWYG only overrides formatting in the Word document. So for example, if there's no conflict, there's no change. So here in the Word document, we told it to bold the severity and the severity name. So they're bold in the generated. But in the WYSIWYG editor, we made this purple. So now we have bold and purple. This allows you to customize the formatting applied by the styles in your Word document by making changes in the WYSIWYG. So it's very, very flexible and very powerful. And we're working all the time to add additional tools and support for new style types and things like that through the WYSIWYG. And actually part of our roadmap going forward will be being able to create additional report sections, not just findings inside of Ghostwriter. So we'll close this and get back to Ghostwriter. This has been a complete demo of all the key features of Ghostwriter, but there is one more thing I want to show you as a sneak peek for what's currently available in our release candidate for version 2.3, and will, I think, be a very big, very exciting feature going forward, and that is the GraphQL API. So if you grab the release candidate, you'll have access to a Hasura container, which is the Hasura GraphQL engine, and you'll have access to this console. You don't have to use the console to interact with the API, but this will be a lot easier for this demo than showing you a script sending API calls. So really nice thing for GraphQL that is different than a standard REST API, like many that you're probably familiar with, is that it avoids the so-called under or over fetching problem. So with a REST API, if, for example, we wanted to fetch all of the reports titles and findings and their titles from within a project, we might have to make several API calls to get the project data, get all the reports, get their titles, and also fetch all the findings related to that report. With GraphQL, we can send one query. In this case, we're telling it that we want a project. Let's get back the client's name, the code name for the project, all of its reports, the report title, all the findings, and the title. And we run that, and we get back all that data as JSON. So there's going to be a lot of really exciting things that you can do with this. For example, looking back at some of the things I showed you moments ago, like updating domain data, if you have a registrar and you would like to sync all of your domain names from that registrar with Ghostwriter, and that registrar has an API, you could easily fetch all your domains from the registrar and use the GraphQL API to update Ghostwriter and keep it up to date with all of your domains. Likewise, you could do health checks and other checks and changes to those domains and update Ghostwriter as it goes. Or go as far as creating whole other applications that talk to Ghostwriter to pull data and show project and assessment status, or other information pulled from Ghostwriter, or push that information to Ghostwriter. I'm really looking forward to see what people do with this. It's going to pave the way for a lot of new features down the road, but also opening it up to all Ghostwriter users is going to allow for a lot of creativity and interesting middleware and external interactions with Ghostwriters, adding to the power that's already available to you for reporting and project management. So if you're curious about the GraphQL API, it is documented on the wiki. It's still, as I said at the time of this recording for Black Hat Asia, it is still part of a release candidate. It's not in production yet as we do testing and gather feedback and make changes to it, but it is available for you to go and experiment with and try out. Or you can look for it coming out here in the next few months. With that, we have just a couple of housekeeping items for the end. The first is our development roadmap for 2022. For the rest of this quarter, we're going to be focused on the GraphQL API, testing it and gathering feedback. If you're curious to add your feedback to the mix, grab that 2.3 release candidate and let us know what you think. We also have a popular request for adding support for CVSS and dread scoring, and we hope to have that available around the June timeframe. Speaking of June, in Q3 is when we hope to begin working on adding new sections beyond just findings to the report editor. So you can do things like write your attack path narrative, executive summary, and other sections that you might have in your reports, all within Ghostwriter. And as we get near the end of the year in Q4, we're going to be looking at image editing. So right now, when you're uploading images for evidence to Ghostwriter, you probably want to crop them, add any annotations, redact items, things like that before you upload to Ghostwriter. We want to make it even easier so that you can upload your screenshots to Ghostwriter and crop them, add annotations, text, redactions right there, all from within Ghostwriter. Make it as easy as possible. Finally, a couple of Ghostwriter resources. The Ghostwriter Wiki is your number one source for all documentation and discussion of Ghostwriter. GetGhostwriter.io will take you right to the GitHub repository, so you don't need to fiddle with the longer GitHub link. Just hit that domain and you'll be taken right to the code if you want to check out Ghostwriter today. You can also join us on Slack. SpectreOps has the Bloodhound Slack. You can use this HerokuApp.com link to join it. And you can find Ghostwriter discussion in the Ghostwriter and reporting channels. And finally, a little while ago, we did a presentation on Ghostwriter talking about how SpectreOps uses it and some of the methodologies and workflows that we baked into Ghostwriter and why we do things the way we do. These are topics we didn't get into too deeply in the demo. So if you're curious about why Ghostwriter works the way it is or how SpectreOps uses it, check out that presentation. And with that, thank you for joining.